continue for the foreseeable future, and that it's able to do so within current and anticipated resources available. For the accounts, this assessment specifically relates to whether we can continue to operate for a period of 12 months from the date of signing the audit opinion. Whilst the accounts have always been previously been prepared and certified on a going concern basis, due to the increased risks and uncertainties surrounding our financial position, particularly in light of recent events with COVID, a separate report is now prepared for committee to highlight the factors taken into account to arrive at the going concern assessment. Those factors are fully explained in the report, and just to summarise, they include an assessment of our current financial position. So that includes consideration of last year's robust outturn position and the current level of reserves available, which demonstrate the continued good management of the budget and the adequacy of those reserves, which are at 11.1 million altogether in terms of reserves that are available for use by the council in delivery of its services. And they are above the minimum levels of the £1 million that I set when council approves the budget each year. Moving on to the council's projected financial position, the 21-22 annual budget and medium-term financial plan was approved by council in March of last year, and as CFO at that time I confirmed the robustness of the estimates and adequacy of reserves in light of the strategic financial risk issues that the council was facing at the time. The increased risks and financial challenges arising from COVID were fully recognised, and the strategic options for managing emerging budget pressures, including further use of reserves to support the budget and a new target for efficiencies, was approved by Budget Council last year. The development of proposals, what Council also did approve was a new target for efficiency, and the development of proposal to meet that target and identification of any further emerging risks will be considered in the forthcoming 22-23 budget at Council next month in light of the local government finance settlement. The final two factors considered in the going concern assessment are the Council's governance arrangements, which are well established and robust as detailed in the annual governance statement, which was considered by this committee in June of last year. And finally, the regulatory and control environment in which we operate, which is highly legislated and within central government control. And as a last resort, central government does provide a backstop to prevent failure, but that's clearly not a place where we would ever wish to be. The government, though, have acknowledged, particularly since COVID, that some authorities may be facing unmanageable pressures, and we have seen some support go into some authorities in the country. So taking all of those factors into consideration, together with the Council's strong track record in financial management, I have concluded that the Council can continue to operate as a going concern for the period of 12 months from the date of signing the audit opinion. And the recommendation for committee chair is to note that the assessment, and that's detailed on page 9 of the report.
Thank you. Right, so those of you who've been through this before will note that it's not greatly changed from last year. It's not perfect, but it is survivable. Yes, Councillor Boyle.
Thank you very much. Perhaps a sort of naive question, perhaps, but it says under item 4 of this report, under item 4 of this report,
implications that are directly arising from the report. So if we need to set a budget, or we need to, so if there are any spending issues arising from it, and there aren't actually from this report, it is a report about the financial position, yes. So I suppose in that respect, they're all detailed throughout the report.
Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. Can I move that we note this report and convey our thanks to the officers for their work during these difficult times?
Second. Thank you. Those in favour, please show. Any against? Carried unanimously. Okay. Agenda item 5. I'll probably pronounce it wrongly. Mazars External Audit Report for 2020-21. Going to be presented by David Hoos. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Chair. So you have our audit completion report with you this evening. I'm hoping that the flavour it gives you is of a very clean audit process, really. The audit is substantially complete. We have no issues of any substance arising to date. So I think that's very positive and very pleasing in terms of findings from the audit process. In terms of the highlights of the report, in section 1 on page 7, we set out the aspects of our work and repeat the statement that the audit process is very nearly complete. I'll give you a further update on that in a moment. And as things stand, we will be in a position to issue an unqualified audit opinion, which is the clean opinion, the good opinion. So that's very positive. Councillors will recall from earlier planning meetings that actually we have to give more narrative commentary on the council's value for money arrangements this year as well. So that work is still ongoing. We have a slightly longer timeline to give that separate opinion, but there's nothing coming out of our work to date on value for money that will give rise to any significant findings. And then section 2 of the paper then moves on really to set out what was outstanding at the time the report was issued for inclusion in this evening's papers. And possibly the only higher priority item that was outstanding was our work on property, plant and equipment valuation. It's an area that our regulator continues to place significant scrutiny on and expects us to do more and more work each year. Since the papers come out to you, we've had all of the information we need from management to finish that work. That's being worked through by my team. There are no issues coming out of that work to date. So subject to just review of that work by my audit manager and myself, there should be no further issues coming out of that work. So that was the only substantive item that was outstanding when we issued the report. The report then goes on, Chair, in section 4 to talk through those significant risks that we identified at the planning stage. And again, pleasingly, there are no findings to bring to your attention this evening in terms of any issues that arose. Section 5 is the area where we'd identify any internal control recommendations coming from our work. And again, you will see there are none there. So again, a very clean bill of health from an internal control point of view. And section 6 is the area that actually catches the auditor's scorecard, for want of a better word, where we would identify any potential or actual adjustments to the numbers that have arisen during the audit process. And other than a small immaterial adjustment that could be made coming out of the finalisation of the pension scheme accounts, which is an issue that all Nottinghamshire authorities have had to face this year, there are no proposed adjustments to the numbers. So actually, putting this into context for councillors, this is possibly as clean as it gets, really. There are no adjustments to the numbers, no control findings, and we are very nearly there. We have all of the information we need. We would expect to be in a position to sign our audit opinion within the next week to 2 weeks.
Got any questions?
I'd like to make 2 comments. Page 5, sorry, not page 5, section 2, status of the audit. I'm not clear on what these orange dots are, because the 3 explanations, the colour looks all the same. I wonder if perhaps you could, in future years, adopt a traffic light system, then we would know exactly what each of them meant. And could also you prepare it in a larger font. I know that we're all looking for ways to save money, but it looks about 6 point to me, and it's a bit difficult to read for people with vision problems. Having said all that, it is very pleasing to hear the findings of Mazar, and it again shows what a prudent local authority we are and what good officers we have. So in conclusion, I'd like to move that we note this with pleasure at the fact that there are no findings.
Yes.
Yeah, I think following on from Councillor Lawrence's is pleased with the general conclusions of the report. I think we ought to place on record our thanks to the leadership team and the internal people involved in providing information to Mazars, and note that we are a well-run authority, and we are solvent despite the considerable pressure from central government on our finances, given that we were still in the bottom tier in terms of getting any money or any recognition of the difficulties that COVID has inevitably placed. So within that context, I think we can say that that Gedling has done remarkably well.
Thank you, Councillor Boyle. Any other questions? Some comment.
It was just to come back to Councillor Lawrence in terms of the traffic lights. I think it might have been a reproduction issue. So we do have the traffic lights within the audit completion report. So I'll share that with you so that you've got, it's clear it must have been a reproduction problem.
If you look at item 2 on here, Councillor Lawrence, it's on page 7. Yeah, well, the top one in actual fact is orange and the other 3 are green, believe it or not.
Not on my copy.
I know.
Thank you.
Causes confusion. Okay. Right. So I understand that you've proposed the motion. Thank you. Recommended. Can I have a seconder for the recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Boyle. Those in favour, please show. Unanimous. Thank you, everybody. Right. Item 6. It's the annual government statement and statement of accounts 2021.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this report requests the approval of the annual governance statement and the statements of accounts for 2021. As discussed at the last meeting of this committee, these are presented on a bit of a delayed timescale due to capacity issues arising during the audit, and therefore they are beyond the date set in regulations of the 30th September for approval and publication of the accounts. But as detailed in the report, the regulations require that the annual governance statement must be approved by this committee in advance of the approval of the statement of accounts. So we need firstly to consider taking recommendation 1 on page 19 first before we move to consider the remaining recommendations. So just by way of a bit of background in relation to recommendation 1, the final version of the annual governance statement is on page 27 of the agenda pack for consideration. Members will recall considering the draft annual governance statement at its meeting on 29th of June, and I can confirm that since then there's only been one minor change relating to the introduction of the Financial Management Code, which we are required to adopt from April of 2021, and that's detailed in paragraphs 7.23 and in the actions of 7.32 of the annual governance statement. The amendment was included in the draft version that was published with the Statement of Accounts in July 2021. And members will recall considering the Financial Management Code self-assessment at the meeting back in September and referring that to Cabinet for approval. So that's all been through this committee. There have been no other changes, but just to remind you briefly that the review of the effectiveness of the governance framework, including assurances from managers and both external and internal audit, did not highlight any significant control issues or risk management concerns. And the head of internal audit concluded in the annual audit opinion that we have an effective framework for risk management, governance and internal control. And that's just been supported by the external auditor here today. So the impact of COVID was clearly a significant issue for us during 2021, and that's fully recognised in the governance statement as well. So, Chair, I'll pause there, and I'll be happy to take any questions or before we vote on recommendation 1.
Okay.
If there are any.
Concerning recommendation 1 at this point. Yes, Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to move that we approve the annual government statement for 2021. And at the risk of repeating myself, there's only one of me, again, it's very pleasing that we have such good staff and we don't have any significant issues, and that's proved by the clean bill of health from the internal and external auditors, and long may it continue. Thank you.
I have a seconder. Thank you. Those in favour, please show. Unanimous. Thank you very much. Second item on the recommendations is that, subject to the approval of the annual government statement, which we've just done, at recommendation 1, members that approve the statements of account for 2021, Appendix 2, subject to the outstanding items identified in the external auditor's report being finalised, and to delegate authority to the final approval of the auditor's statement of the accounts to the Director of Corporate Resources and S151 officer in consultation with the Chair of the Audit Committee, subject to a satisfactory outcome of the outstanding items, and to report back to the Audit Committee to detail of any changes if required. We also, at the same time, will be covering items 3 and 4. Members to note the narrative statement on pages 3 to 18, and members agree the letter of representation, Appendix 3. We're taking all 3 of these together. Any questions from anybody? A proposer for all of that little lot? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to move these further recommendations with pleasure.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Seconder, please. Thank you, Councillor Boyle. The old grey cells are getting a bit confused these days. Right, all those in favour, please show. Any against? No? Okay, thank you very much. I think concludes the items on the agenda. I've not been advised of any other items which I consider urgent. So I think that terminates the meeting. Thank you all for coming. Thank you. We're going to get the next one sorted now, haven't we? You've got to get the next one sorted now.